Welcome to Tuesday Trash Talk at 10. My name is Cheryl Baldwin, and I'm with the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, and I also run the What's In, What's Out program for the Recycle CT Foundation. While traditionally I talk about things related to recycling in your blue bin, today I'm going to be talking about worm composting. If you have a topic that you would like me to cover in the future, by all means, put it in the comment section and I'll try to get to it in the future. So, worm composting, what is it all about? Well, it is a form of composting, but it's different than what you might do in your backyard. In your backyard, you're creating a pile, you want a certain size because you want the heat that then breaks down everything, all the different microorganisms and bacteria. You have leaves and you might have small twigs, and you would have like plant matter as well as food scraps. Well, with worms, you're only doing your food scraps. That's all you're doing. It's really about food waste composting. And I have a great book to recommend. It's called Worms Eat My Garbage by Mary Applehoff. And she has a couple of other books, and by all means, if there are other resources out there to help you, I encourage you to look them up. I'm not meant to be doing a workshop today. I just want to entice you with the idea of looking into it. And so I also wanted to point out the term eat my garbage. What is that all about? Because clearly we're only talking about food scraps. Well, traditionally, if you're looking at terms and what terms mean, traditionally the word garbage meant just the wet waste coming out of our house. That's why pigs are traditionally eat garbage, as well as sometimes chicken eats certain parts of our garbage, because it's the wet waste, it's the food scraps that come out, it's the slop, if you will. Rubbish, trash, garbage are now terms that we use interchangeably. However, that wasn't the case not too long ago. And so we sort of lose that, but in any case, we'll just call it food scraps for now. So worms, usually you need to put them in some type of a container or a bin. You could use a tub, drill some holes in the bottom because that you want to have drainage, and you also need to allow for circulation of air. They are a living creature, so you want to make sure that you're creating a home for them in which they can survive. They also like it dark, and they like it damp. That doesn't mean swimming pool, and it doesn't mean too dry, because they need their skin to be moist in order to be able to breathe and survive. So you need a container that provides moisture, a container that provides airflow, and then you want to feed them regularly, and then you also want to figure out how to capture and gather all of that finished compost, or vermicompost, or castings, or manure, or you could call it what it is. It's really worm poop. But it's great stuff in your garden as well as for indoor house plants. So why would you compost with worms instead of outdoors? Well, maybe you're an apartment dweller. Maybe you don't have a big yard. Maybe you don't want to go outside. Maybe you want to stay inside and explore with worms. All good reasons. So some ideas for bedding. If you have a box and you need to put bedding, shredded newspaper or even shredded white paper, though make sure you're not using glossy. You can just hand shred it. You'll find tons of DIY videos out there to help you figure out how to do it. In terms of what they eat, again, it's just food scraps. I have some apple peels, apple core, some onion peels, and some stalks from parsley, and I also have a couple of limes. One note, worms are a little finicky. They don't like citrus too much. So if you have a juicer, and you juice a lot of grapefruit or oranges, you definitely don't want to put a lot of citrus in there. Maybe just one or two, but definitely not a lot. And I personally don't put in banana peels, and that's because banana peels often come in with fruit flies, and I don't want them to stay in the home. In terms of where it goes, mine is traditionally in the basement. However, I pulled it up today so I could share it with you because my basement was too dark to tape this live feed. And I've also I've had a worm bin for a long time, So I've also had it, you can have it in your kitchen, under your sink, as well as I had it in a sort of a crawl space that was really dark and dank enough at one point that was sort of semi-indoors, semi-outdoors. And then I insulated it in the winter because they don't want it too cold. So I'm going to open up my bin. I have a very large container. I actually have a manufactured plastic container, and it is like a tower with little individual trays. And that's because these type of worms like to, they're top feeders, and so they'll climb up to where the food is. You'll find that they're not the kind of worms that you're going to find outdoors in your garden or your compost. And most people mail order them unless you already know somebody that does worm composting and they can give you some. And there are different spreadsheets to figure out how many worms you need for your size household based on how much garbage or wet waste or food scraps you generate that you're going to feed them. So I'm just going to pick through mine and see if I can find some worms to show you. Again, they're not the traditional worms that you might find in your garden. And you're definitely not going to find these are the ones to fish with. You can see some pieces here of worms that are inside the worm castings. They're kind of fallen off of the spoon. They don't like light, so they're going to try to get away from the light. They will not leave your bin. I get a lot of questions about if they'll leave the bin. And they'll leave the bin if they're not happy. If it's too dry, if it's too wet, if you forget to feed them, if it's not dark or it's too cold, they definitely will leave because they're great at helping us understand if we're providing the right conditions. They reproduce very quickly, which is quite fun. So a lot of educational opportunities here. If you are a parent and you're trying to come up with an activity, this is great in the classrooms as well as in the home. And there's so much to learn. You'll find that worms do ingest it, but they need bacteria, fungi, and protozoa to sort of break it down a little bit to begin with. And then they have a gizzard, and it goes through their gizzard, and it breaks it up further. So tons to learn about with worms. What else? You can sometimes see cocoons if you're really interested in cocoons, are the capsules that they create after reproduction. And when little worms come out, they look like little strings, but they are little worms. And so again, you can actually see them with the naked eye, but if you had a microscope, you could probably see a lot more. Mary Applehoff does include some of what else is in your bin, as well as different ways in which you can calculate how much material, how many worms you need based on how much garbage you generate. But by all means, other resources. There's so many resources out there. What else can I say real quick? If you already are a worm enthusiast and you've never seen Gary Larson's "There's a Hair in My Dirt," it's a fun book. I can't not share it. Of course, I'm a worm enthusiast, so I love Gary Larson's book. So I encourage you to read that if it's fun. It's not for young children. It is an adult book. It includes issues of, death and decay, which if your kids are fun and they think that's funny, then by all means, because that's what composting is, right? It's about decay, things break down, and then they create this finished product that we can use in our gardens. What else can I say about worms and worm composting? I think that's it for now. I encourage you to learn more and start worm composting. And remember, this is not an activity to reduce your food scraps or your food waste, but it is a way to divert them from your trash can. And so I encourage you to learn a little bit more and think about if you want to start it at home. I thank you very much for joining me today.